the fall of our semester year, both Jeff and Dave started going into freshman seminar classes and presenting this idea of this course that was going to be taking place a year later. And applications went out last spring semester, I believe later in the spring, and that process of applications continued through later this past fall semester. And then we arrived here with 13 of us choosing to partake in this course, and it's been quite a ride. So, what has that ride been? Give you a little synopsis of the components of the course. So, it was designed with 4 courses with 4 classes within the course in mind. One class taught by each professor in their discipline, and then a 4th co-taught course. So, Reading and Writing Appalachia, taught by Catherine, we examined the history, culture, and values of Appalachia through examining creative writing of the area. Specifically, we looked at the idea of sense of place. We asked questions of how is a place, specifically Appalachia, represented? What are the stereotypes? And how through documentation such as movies that we watched and literature, how are these stereotypes reinforced and or challenged? And we wrestled with this idea throughout the semester and had opportunities to read and watch movies and then write similar literature and write arguments and inspirations from what we examined. Ecological change in the Southern Appalachians, taught by Dave. We covered the ecological history and development of the region. Specifically, the goal of this class was to examine a specific place and read how is that place managed and how can we move forward in managing it in a more sustainable manner. And we have a specific example of a final project for Dave's class that I'll show in just a little bit. And Landscapes of Appalachia, taught by Jeff. We looked at the history of the region through the man-made landscapes, both physical and social. Specifically, we examined the powers that be and how power dictates the developments that take place over history. And through that course, we spent time looking at our local region. We began by just looking at Pack Square. Yes, okay. Pack Square right there in the middle of Asheville. That was what we first examined. And we moved out to broader Appalachian, and we moved back into our local region again, and that's what we're working on currently. Is all of us have a big final project to do for Jeff, examining a specific place within our local community. And our 4th course, Engaging Appalachia, was the Team Talk course. And in this course, we did service, and that was kind of the basis for going on all of the extended field trips that we wanted. And I'm not going to go in depth about that because Kern and Phaedra have specific things to tell you about that. So let's meet the class of these amazing people that made this experience speak. Sarah, Curran, Sam, Willow, Gabby, Paul, Ben, Creighton, Margot, Nadia, Pablo, Phaedra, and myself. So here we have a project done by Pablo and myself as a final for Dave's class. Our final, we were asked to write historical and, analysis of pictures, 6 historical, 6 current, and then a proposal for the future. And Pablo and I decided to get a little creative and make a film based on the theme of that project. And here it is.
Welcome to the experience of watching. Please please realize that this process takes much time, like pottery sitting in film. We do not mean to offend, as some of this film is in jest, but we have worked hard and put in an effort that is our very best. Now sit back and relax and be quiet.
Hey, seriously, hey.
Greetings.
We're working on a film. Southern Appalachia is home to a mixed mesophytic forest, one of the world's most biologically diverse temperate forests in the world. The beautiful Appalachian woodland that we see today has changed completely from what it once was, and it could be argued that the forests are not what they once used to be.
Walking through the woods, there is a story to read of the way this land has been used. If you asked historians what the woods of Appalachia looked like when the first settlers arrived, they would tell you about trees tens of feet in diameter and so tall that today's tallest trees would have only been secondary in their canopy. So where did these giants of the past go?
How did they disappear?
It's important to remember that before the European settlers came into the area, native indigenous peoples such as the Shawnee, Choctaw, Creek, and Cherokee had already been living off the land for thousands of years. The European settlers had changed the forest dynamics drastically during the 15 and 1600s, but the land they were tinkering with had already been changed before their arrival. It's a common misconception to believe the Spanish explorers were coming to North America and seeing an untouched, natural, and pristine wilderness. This stigma may have been because of the light tread the Indians had on the land and their transparencies within the forest themselves. Either way, the Native Americans had a big impact on the land and played a large role in the beginning of a long journey to the human disturbance of Appalachian ecosystems. The two most common logging practices were small-scale cuttings and periodically controlled burnings. Natives would intentionally burn the forest understory to promote growth of wanted medicinal plants and would also allow them to see long distances through the forest for better hunting. They also practiced shifting cultivation for the agricultural productions, cropping areas to obtain the nutrients until there were none left, then leaving that area behind to allow growth to regenerate on its own after their use. This led them to have a very special connection to the land as they would come back to the overgrown areas to restart this process. The tribes would burn trees like maple, birch, and beech, leaving the thicker barked trees such as chestnut, oak, and hickory. This is why these were the more prevalent species of the European settlement era. There was a new ecological palette for the settlers to craft. Wood has always been one of humans' most used and valuable resources. During the 18th and 19th centuries, settlers viewed timber as their most important tool for the self-sufficient lifestyle they lived. Early logging practices consisted mostly of small clear cuts for the homesteads and for the construction of logging. With the turn of industrialization, logging became a profession. Southern Appalachia was sought out for its resources of lumber from the northeast. With the coming of the railroads in the 1800s, lumber became one of Appalachia's greatest resources. This resulted from the region's forests, both rich in hard and in soft woods. With this change came a new pattern of consumption, which permanently changed the economy of Appalachia. Railroads opened up the opportunity for vast tracts of Appalachian timber to be harvested for the industrial needs of the Northeast and the Midwest of the United States. Those regions suffering from the depletion of their own forest resources sought out new virgin forests, and Appalachia had just what they needed. This movement brought large logging companies into West Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, exploiting the rich resources of the region. American hardwoods at the time were much prized both in the United States and in Europe. In turn, the commercial interest in Appalachia encouraged railroads and logging firms alike to secure the control of the bountiful region and its resources. Just to give some perspective of the degradation done to the region, as Ronald Lewis points out in his book, By 1880, ancient growth forests still covered 2/3 of West Virginia, but by the 1920s, lumbermen had stripped the entire region. Eventually, the land was stripped to a similar state as the Northeast.
Between the chestnut blight, industrial forestry, and catastrophic fires, the forests that we know now are mostly similar age, mostly even aged, and they're of a different species composition than what was here when we got here. The two main logging practices occurring today are clear cutting and high grading for selection harvest, and neither of those really mimic the natural disturbance regime that is occurring in the region. You know, the practices need to change, or the implementation of practices need to change, awareness and education need to change, but economics needs to change as well. Economic considerations. The market needs to change so that it's affordable to do this kind of work. Silviculture is a science about understanding how forest dynamics work, and using that understanding of dynamics and the understanding of natural disturbance patterns to accomplish the objectives you're trying to accomplish. That's forestry. The extractive kind of logging without any understanding of forest dynamics or any intention for what was going to happen once the trees were removed. I mean, they just thought there were so many trees we could never take them all. And we didn't have to really worry about the future. And that's still happening now, like I said.
Perplexed by the so-called wisdom that Sean Short shared with us, we sought out the guidance of North Carolina's wisest historian for his advice on how to move forward.
Dr. Keith, moving into the future, what do you suggest we do with our
In my younger, more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he said, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. He didn't say anymore, but we were always unusually communicative in a reserved way, and I understood he meant a great deal more than that.
Dr. Keith, could you answer my question?
Well, reading the forested landscape in the future, I think it would be crucial for us to first examine the past while analyzing the various power structures that have shaped the landscape.
Okay, that's enough of that. Okay, that's enough of that. To sustain healthy forests into the future, the general mentality needs to shift. The practices of logging and forestry can no longer be thought of as separate. To positively move forward, we must step back and remember the crucial connection that humans and nature have with one another. Just in the way that we must provide for us, we must give back to the world. This mentality results in the best change. So benefit requires an understanding of the ecological patterns of the region. Because our life is also happening on the resources we take, the way in which forests are managed will dictate the resources we have.
Thanks for putting up with that. Maybe you want with the lights. I guess lastly, what I'll just say is that while each of these courses that we have had were within their particular discipline, they were designed in a way that they worked with one another. And so the knowledge that we were gaining from one class just spilled over into the next. And while that was a film made for specifically Dave's class, I think it'd be wrong to say that that was only information that we learned in his class. And so just in that way, it was. I think that was the true benefit of this course in general, was that you had all these classes, and while they were all their own class, we were learning about one subject from so many perspectives that it really gave a well-rounded experience.
And to completely round out our experience, we had a service class, and that was mainly taught by Jeff and Dave. And we worked at the South Asheville Cemetery in Kenilworth. The cemetery, when we got there, was pretty overgrown. There was some parts of it that had only just been deeded over to the cemetery itself from neighboring residents, and there were still vines covering the ground, gravestones completely covered with sticks and roots, and it was incredibly unmanaged for years. The cemetery itself was open from the early 1800s. It was a slave cemetery, and it was owned by the McDowell family and was deeded over to their former slave, George Avery, after the Civil War. And George Avery maintained it and worked there for many years until he passed away, and he's buried there. And the cemetery itself closed in 1943, and again, it was left primarily unmanaged. In 1985, students from the local high school came and fixed it up, and since then, there have been multiple efforts to restore the cemetery, and ours is the most recent. We worked also, with the South Asheville Cemetery Association and UNCA, trying to get this place to look as good as it could. And along with the physical labor of hauling sticks and brush and very large logs out of the area, we were also doing research, trying to build a website. And we had several crews going around. We had historical photos, historical documents, current photos, and an oral history group. And we managed to collect as many, and there's not much, sadly, because people have allowed this place to be forgotten. But we got as much as we could and put it together in a website. So we have here a history of all of the restoration projects that have gone on, a history of the cemetery itself. We have photographs. The historical photographs are mostly from the work, and there's George smiling, and this is from the 80s when I think AmeriCorps was out there and high school students as well as UNCA. And the way the cemetery looks in those pictures is kind of how we found it in January. And we also have current photos of what we were able to do. We put in, so yeah, there it is. And we put in a fence. We cleared as much off as we could. We were able to find some graves. We even found a bone this one time. And then we did as much as we could to preserve the history, because it's incredibly important that this place stays maintained and it keeps what it is, because there's historical relevance to all of it. And here are pictures of us working. And yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was ultimately fulfilling. And it culminated in a celebration just a couple weeks ago, where we had members of the community come out and help us finish up with the fence and clear out a little bit more of the brush and gnarly stuff that was in there. And yeah, it was a good time, and we managed to get it all done. So we should be proud of ourselves, guys.
Yay!
All right, so the third big component of our class this semester was travel, and we traveled quite a lot. As Marone said, we saw communities throughout Western North Carolina and the greater Southern Appalachian region. Each set of field trips coincided with the set of classes that we'd taken that week. So, for example, when we were studying the effects of religion on the region with Jeff, later that week we went and visited the Billy Graham Training Center, the Blue Ridge Assembly, and Montreat, all of which are bastions, if you will, of religious power in the region. We took 2 long overnight trips, one to Haywood County and one to Kentucky, and I'll talk more about those when we get to them in a slideshow of pictures. So here we are at the Swannanoa Tunnel. Swannanoa Tunnel, if you don't know, is just down the road from us. It was the first cut through and into the area, and really opened up for economic development. Beginning of the semester, we traveled downtown, visited UNCA, the North Carolina room in the Pack Library, and Triangle Park. Dave took us on a bunch of field trips, explained management issues, things of that nature. These here are from Sugar Creek. We also went to Rocky Knob, Max Patch. That's a heck of a ride up to Max Patch in January, if you ever think about it. Great views, great times. Right here is the Robbie Lee Hall at the Blue Ridge Assembly. And there we are with the oil painting of Billy Graham that everyone gets their picture taken with. At the Cove. Outside, that gentleman up there is Pete Peary, the president of Montreat College, another Presbyterian college in the area. On our trip to Haywood County, before we even left, we were given a concert by the Stewart Brothers, who are 2 Haywood County natives who are world-renowned string band performers. Great music. Our first stop in Haywood County was at Barnett Cove. The gentleman there explaining his sawmill is Dave Barnett. There he is with his camel. It's rather interesting to find a camel in Appalachia. But he had a great collection of just all the oldest machinery you can imagine. Knew how it all worked too. It was pretty great. We ate at this great little spot called the Jukebox Diner. If you're in Haywood County, I recommend it. After staying the night at Lake Junaluska, which is a Methodist retreat in Haywood County, we went to Cataloochee National Park, where Dave walked us up and down the Boogerman Trail and explained the forest systems of the area. And over there, if you don't know, Cataloochee has a few houses preserved from when they basically kicked everyone off their land. And there are 2 professors, Jeff and Dave, who we affectionately call Mom and Dad, standing on the front porch of Dog Trot. Yeah, so we went to Cataloochee in early March, late February, and you don't really know cold until you have to cross rivers in that area. Yeah, no, Jeff and I were talking about we still can't feel our feet. Like I said, we went up to Rock Knob, another great little outlook in the area. The last, like, I don't know, 50 feet of the climb was up a hill like that. And crazy stuff. Great views though. When we went to Kentucky, one of the first things we did was visit the Bell County Coal. And Ben, if you can't tell, is a great fan of coal mining, especially strip mining. But the dust you're seeing in the back coming out of the mouth of the mine we visited, which was Gardena number 2, is stone dust. They were stone dusting, which does something. He doesn't say. I believe it's to keep the coal dust down. This is one of the gentlemen that was monitoring the tracking systems in the mine. He had pretty interesting political views. And though we had to leave our politics at the drift mouth, he did not, and we got an earful. This is down in the corner, one of the cars that the miners take in through that mouth you saw earlier. Basically, they lay down in that cart and drive hundreds of miles into a mountain to mine. Pretty insane stuff. Later on, we visited the towns of Benham and Lynch, 2 coal company towns. One of them, I believe it's Lynch, has a museum they're starting called 31. It's actually an inactive mine portal, and out in front they have this great piece of mining machinery called the continuous miner. We played around on that, had a great time, met some folks with family that have worked in the mine, met a gentleman that had been in the mine for 40 years. It was a great experience talking to those people. It really is a way of life across Kentucky. On this trip, we also went up to a mountaintop removal site, which, if you don't know, mountaintop removal is a type of surface mining where they literally do take off the top of the mountain and put it in the valley below. Obviously, this leaves pretty awful soil on top, but the American Chestnut Association Foundation has been developing a seed for the chestnut that is 15/16 American, 1/16 Chinese. So it's been bred to resist the blight that wiped them off the face of the map. And these trees just so happen to take well into dry, rocky soil, which I can find there. So what you see there is 625 stakes, all of which now have a chestnut seed planted underneath them. That was a pretty intense thing, seeing the entire top of the mountain taken off. But hopefully, the restoration chestnut, which is the 15/16, will take, and this and many other places scattered across the region are test sites for this chestnut. We learned while we were there how to use a really interesting tool called a hodad. It's basically a big axe that you use to plant trees. It was really fun as mine was doing it, and a view from the mountain. You can see the one in the background has been level. That's not a normal shape for mountains to take around here. More recently, we went to Gatlinburg, up at the top, and saw the effect of the tourist industry on Appalachia, what that looks like. And for those of you not familiar with the area, Gatlinburg is called the Myrtle Beach of the mountains, and it quite literally is a beach town in the middle of the mountains. We also, on our way to Cherokee, passed over the Cumberland Gap, and that's a view from there. And finally, kind of out of place, but a pretty picture, when we were in Kentucky, we also visited the cabin of James Still, one of the most preeminent Appalachian writers. His book we read by him this semester was River of Earth. It's an excellent read, and if you haven't read it, I recommend it. So what we're going to do now, before we start a Q&A, is just share a favorite memory from the course. Personally, I loved the day we spent in Cataloochee. We all got up really early, drove a beautiful drive into Great Smoky Mountains National Park, cooked breakfast in a big misty field, and then lost all sensation in our feet hiking through icy rivers. It was a gorgeous hike, gorgeous day, and really one of my favorite times spent in this spot.
The day we went up to Max Patch, it was in January, and the roads were still really quite icy. And Dave, our fearless leader, drove the 14-passenger van up a mountain, or tried. I think at least all of us at least once feared for our life during that drive. It was very small roads, very icy, very big van. But we stopped about halfway up the mountain and had to climb on still icy roads. I pulled my hip out that day, and then we got up to the Max Patch and spent about 20 minutes there-ish, having a snowball fight, of course. And it was really scary, but really fun. I feel like it was one of the first times we bonded as a group, kind of having that whole group fear that we could all relate to in that moment. But Dave did great. He made sure that none of us died. So that was pretty good.
I'm going to give a little nerdier answer. I think what I'm going to take away from this course and what I enjoyed the most was getting to know the local region and getting the opportunity to learn about the place in which I'm going to school. I also, before we finish, want to acknowledge those who made this experience possible for us. David Quinn, George Taylor, and George Gibson were who have made the experience at the cemetery possible. They have been there for, how many years have you been there?
About 16.
16 years.
Taylor and Gibson have been there all their lives.
Yeah, without the work that they do, our experience there wouldn't have been possible. I want to recognize the Service Learning Office. From them, we received the Service Fellowship Grant, David grant, which really gave us all the supplies that we needed and all the experiences that we had at the cemetery possible as well. And also want to recognize the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation for the grant that we received from them, and Amy Nicely, who, as far as I understand, did a lot of work for us, and specifically was there to make sure we had bands every time we were on a field trip. So thank you all who made this experience possible for us.
I guess we'll jump some questions you have about the course, about the classes, anything specifically that we did.
So I work in the service program, and just last summer we had a conversation about how challenging it might be for some students to engage in the local community because so many people are not from this area and aren't familiar with the area. And so I wonder, I heard at the very beginning you talked about sense of place, and I kind of heard that thread throughout your presentation. I'm wondering, how do you think this semester do you think it will have any effect this semester, the combination of coursework, do you think it will have any effect on how any of you engage in the local communities?
On a personal level, I feel much more connected, at least to one small group of community members at the South Asheville Cemetery. It's very hard to learn the history of that sort of place and interview people, listen to interviews from people, and not feel some sort of connection. I think it definitely has helped me, better understand how to engage in a community with a community. Yeah. Do y'all have anything to say to that?
Yeah, I think that I think I can speak on behalf of all of us that no matter what, going into the future, doing any service projects in our local community and potentially in the more broad region of Appalachia, we're all more aware of the reality of what people's lives are here on the whole spectrum. So I think in that way, if nothing else, we're going to be less. Each of us will be less ignorant going into these service opportunities, personally, it's definitely inspired me to continue to reach out and see what else is going on there. Because I think that what this course did was it gave us a beautiful opportunity to recognize the reality, to recognize the issues. But I think for a lot of us, the next step would be to actually start engaging in a further process.
I feel the same way as both of them. I feel, since we started working at the cemetery, I've begun to care a lot about the cemetery. And as Curran said, reading the histories, hearing the histories, meeting people who worked there and have put so much effort into it. And we were only there for a semester, but I still think it's a place I'll go back to and want to work on, because it should be as beautiful as it can be. And it made me really proud when we were there last Saturday to look out and see it's clear, there's no crazy amount of weeds growing around, there's a fence, and to know I had a part in that really, it feels good. And I think it's something that I hadn't gotten yet at Wilson and got this semester, and really was beneficial.
Any other questions?
So as you mentioned, I had a kind of shadow role in this, and then I was administering the Arthur Vining Davis grant funds that were supporting this to some extent. And that grant is money that came to the college specifically to develop interdisciplinary teaching that spoke to environmental and sustainability issues. And we thought that this class would be a good occasion to kind of to roll that out a little bit and see how that worked. I do have a specific question, but I'd be interested in anything you have to say about your experience with environmental and sustainability issues in the course of this semester. But specifically, it felt like a fair bit of what you were doing was looking at the present and looking at the past. So I'm wondering, how does this prepare you? How did this course speak to how you look at the future and how you think about the future and move into the future?
Well, I mean, I'm a history major, so I don't do science really at all. And I think Dave's an excellent teacher, and he really explained it in a way that made it easy to understand, made it easy to process. And I think this course as a whole has made me really appreciate the effect that we've had on our environment and think critically about what we need to do going forward. Like the chestnut plantings. It's a great thing, bring back the chestnut. But, it brings up the point, the ecosystem has moved forward. What's to bring the chestnut back into it going to do? It's that sort of thing. I think this has definitely helped me learn a lot more than I would have and think more critically than I would have about issues of sustainability and environment.
So I think to answer your your question, how does this relate moving forward? I think that without doubt, all of us are much less ignorant of, revolving around the issues of the region, and so I think that Curran hit it with as far as like what has Dave's class taught us. That, specifically in Catherine's class moving forward, I know that I can analyze literature, and like I spoke to before, specifically looking at, we live in Appalachia, which is a place that has been the subject to stereotypes for as long as most can remember, and so it's how do you move forward in a way. For me, it's like how do I move forward in a way that I am not perpetuating those stereotypes and instead of challenging them, specifically with Jeff's class, I think what it really has taught us is that there's an underlying story to everything that you see, whether it be in the environmental landscape or in the man-made landscape, and with the right tools. You can kind of begin to pull out what you're seeing and kind of figure out the story without much research. All it just takes is looking. So I think those are skills that we've gained in moving forward.
And I think with the combination of classes, as Marin said during the presentation, they really did braid in well with each other. So as we were learning about, potential sustainability plans, or beginning to think about those in Dave's class, we were also thinking about the social effect that occurs in Jeff's class and how that could potentially change things in the future. And we did do a lot of looking back, but I think somebody said it somewhere along the way, one of the professors, probably Jeff, about how you have to look back at least a little bit to go forward and understand the history. And I think they did a really good job, all three of them, of presenting this region from as many different facets as possible and giving us as many different views so that we can think about the future. And in not just this region, but wherever we want to call home or wherever we want to focus on. And it's given, I know me personally, a lot to think about, and it's taught me kind of how to more critically view where we live and what's going on and what could go on.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming.
I just at the end of the point, again, David from the Cemetery Association. I'd like all the folks who participated raise your hand so I can see those here. A tremendous thank you on behalf of the association. And speaking of sustainability, you've probably brought us to a point in sustainability that we've never been able to achieve. And we have, through Dave, Tom Lamaralia, Dave Ellen, introduced a plan. Jeff, you pulled this together to get a plan together to make this a sustainable place. And that's what we've wrestled with for years. Mr. Gibson, Mr. Taylor, who tried their best to do it on their own. We've tried it. Also with the appreciation of Dave Moore, who's been with us for this last 16 years trying to do this. So our sincere appreciation to all of you who participated. I have enjoyed it immensely working with you. Really enjoyed our closeout day. That was a lot of fun, and especially meaningful for so many at the church who expressed their appreciation and how you made the ties to the community. The point well taken that in the future, as you go this course, which you are so, it is such a great benefit for you to have had this experience, because it brings you to a place where anywhere you go in the future, you will now look at it differently. Because you'll be looking at a place and you'll be thinking what you did in this course. What is the history of this place? How can I connect to this place? And how can I be a part of making it sustainable? And from that perspective, you gain something in education here that you don't get at other places. you're very fortunate to have these wonderful professors, Catherine, David, and Jeff, who pulled us together with all the sources and resources that you mustered. So again, on behalf of us at the association, who now caught Jeff into being on the board there, along with Dr. Pearson at UNC Asheville. So we have a collective group that we're working together. And on behalf of all of them, we thank you immensely for the work that you have done. It looks better than it has ever looked in the 16 years that we've been working on it. And we look forward to finishing up. And for those who didn't hear, the day I was coming out to the program, we had another one of the property owners, the developers, called up and said, oh, by the way, that piece of fence that you put in right along the property line next to that lot that's for sale, well, we decided that we want you to go in there and clear it out, and when we find graves in there, we're going to give that land to you as well. So thanks to what you have done, the other developers have already said that we've already got the other side. We're waiting to hear from the other property owners. I hope to hear today that they've reached that line that you helped clear. And the real estate person said she was going to go out and see those horses pull the logs off. So we're really excited. Thank you very much.
I just want to say one last thank you to the students for their willingness to go try this out, for all of you who are coming to listen. And as the reference to the horses was made, and Tom Long, I have to mention Doug Bradley, campus support, and with the Service Learning Office, and then 3 professors. I mean, this is a difficult undertaking, but ultimately it was so steeped in the triad and those moments when things came together and it felt just right. I was so inspired to be part of this team and this college. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you all.